the philosophy of what we've done to try and look at how and when we can determine to shut it down, it's literally based off of our census and our capacity. And so the creation of Six Hudson South, the 12 beds, was predominantly to take care of the overflow of oncology patients that are normally on your medicine unit. So that could be Six Garden North, Six Garden South, Seven Garden North, anywhere where the overflow would be. To kind of give you a baseline understanding of it is between Harkness 11 and Six Hudson North, there are 56 beds. The general medical oncology population usually is a little bit over 65 to 75, right? So there has always been this overflow of patients that were on our medicine unit. By peeling them off of medicine and opening up Six Hudson South, which was the original intent, it helped create more capacity for that COVID surge that we were seeing coming through. And so the beds that our patients would normally go to were now going to be prioritized to our medicine patients that would either be coming from the ED or be coming from home, you name it. So what we're going to closely look at is what that census and volume looks like, right? To date, the current, based off of the last summary report I saw of our COVID numbers, we have about 170 COVID patients in the Milstein building, right? Some of the things to try and help with capacity, right? And I think I've spoken to many of you guys before about this, is the big difference from wave 1 to wave 2 was wave 1, we really shut down business to everything. Wave 2, we started with, our business was ramped up again. We started to see more incoming COVID patients, and we didn't scale back right away on the business that we were producing, right? And so surgical cases weren't being postponed or canceled yet. We were still admitting patients as usual, and then your regular, patients that were coming through your emergency department. In the last couple of weeks to months, they have scaled back on some of the surgical procedures. I don't have much of the detail to it, but the selective cases that they were scaling back on would be any rooms that they would need, any inpatient stays that they would need post-surgery. That majority of this impacts the ICU.
Can I take on again?
I'm trying to put everyone on mute here. So what we're looking at really is going to be the capacity and the numbers, right? And so what we have and what we've been talking about with your patient care directors and with Kate Blair and your medicine services is what are we doing to make sure Six Hudson North and Harkness 11 are full. Now, you guys that live on that unit where it's your home, you know sort of the priority of patients that are coming in to be admitted to your 2 units. In the past, we have had some barriers that we needed to work around as to when and where a patient can be placed. So, for instance, we know bone marrow transplant can only admit non-COVID, COVID negative patients, right? And they required at the time 48-hour testing to be sure that they were COVID negative. That will hold true, except for the fact that we expanded the time to 72 hours. And we did get the approval of the medical director, Marcus Mapara, who agreed to the expansion. So we will still admit patients to Harkness 11 that are COVID negative, but we have expanded the window to 72 hours. The other big change that we've made is who gets admitted to what unit, right? Predominantly and by history, malignant heme has been the prioritization. Bone marrow transplant, leukemia, lymphoma, multiple myeloma have been the patient population that have been in Harkness 11. For Six Hudson North, that patient population was your medical oncology, and it's also your COVID, your positive or negative COVID positive, your COVID patients, right? Harkness 11 traditionally would not admit the solid teach service that is the middle level providers or your residents. They would not normally admit these patients because of team coverage and to be sure they were geographically localized. But we have now removed that temporarily while we are in this surge. So one of the barriers we took away and the busy work that made things more of a struggle for 6 Hudson North and Harkness 11 was to stop the internal transfers so that we can make sure the patient was placed based off of the geographical location of the resident. All right, I'm gonna pause just for a second because I know that can get complicated. And if I can answer any questions regarding the structure of which patients get admitted to what unit, I can certainly do so. So what that means, by opening up the criteria of where we're gonna admit patients to between 6 Hudson North and Harkness 11, they're gonna be your priority units to fill up first because those are our home units. And that way, you would hopefully be able to see 6 Hudson South decant. Now, within the last week and a half that we've been closely monitoring the census on 6 Hudson South. We have been, I think today has been the highest with 13 patients. Kate Blair can confirm that with me, or anyone who's working on 6 Hudson South now, right? So we see a little bit of how that is, how that is working out, right? If the priority is to fill up 6 Hudson North and Harkness 11 first, you're going to start to see the beds, the capacity start to not be filled up on 6 Hudson South, right? So we've also worked very closely with the PTOC so that they know what our prioritization and which units should be filled prior to 6 Hudson South. In addition to that, the discussion of acuity for 6 Hudson South has also been, again, something we have addressed. So Kate, and I keep saying her name, and Kate, if you're on, you may want to just show your face so they know your face behind a name. So for Kate is our inpatient oncology coordinator. She, along with the MAC, the Milstein admitting captain, review and help screen any patients that are going to be admitted to the 3 units, okay? So they go through the acuity, they go through what teams, they go through the appropriateness of where they should be. Now, we know reality is when Kate leaves, half the time PTOC may alter plans be set in stone. So she provides me usually on a daily basis a summary of whatever patients are left to be admitted, a little bit of a synopsis of them, and the current targeted unit they're going to go to. That email is, it'll be sent to the charge nurses on all of the units, but it most importantly goes to the PTOC. So they see what our plans are already. Now I know overnight there might be changes that the PTOC makes, and if there are changes that we can't explain or are unsure of why they did that, they will provide me an explanation of it the following morning, okay? So we want to be sure that the capacity is on our 2 main units, 2 medical oncology units, and then the hope is that we continue to monitor what the census is on 6 Hudson South. As I get those numbers of what the census is on 6 Hudson South, I will continue to provide that to our COO and Courtney, so that we can continue to have on a weekly basis what the discussion, what the trigger would be to shut down the unit. All right, I'm going to pause for a second to see if there's anybody that has questions.
Hey, I just have a question. I'm a nurse on 6 Hudson North about the beds for 6 Hudson South. I know that there were 4 different beds that were palliative care, like ASU beds. Is that still the case for them? Because then I would think that the link wouldn't be so clear as to where they would be. Like if those are meant for ASU type beds, knowing that we do palliative care on our end to an end of life, like would they specifically go there? Because that would make their number be higher.
Yeah, good question, Beth. So they, similar to how we're prioritizing it, if we can put the patient on 6 Hudson North, most times they might be COVID positive, or on Harkness 11 if they're not COVID positive, then we would do so prior to moving them to the 4 beds on 6 Hudson South. The 6 Hudson South beds for those 4 beds are still, they would still be followed by the palliative care service, which is different, right? So normally we have naturally had palliative care patients on both of our units, but most of the time they are all followed by our oncology services. So the difference with those 4 beds, regardless of what unit there are, is really the service that is following them. So it'll continue to be the palliative care service. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, but that also kind of confuses me a little bit, because if palliative is going to be following them, like that's the team that's going to be taking care of them, then I kind of feel like that would make them more specifically go to that unit. I don't know if or if that makes sense. Like having that bed, like 4 beds, kind of seems like, okay, these are 4 beds, these are palliative care patients, these are palliative care doctors. So then that more likely, like, then keep them on 6 Hudson North, or place them on 6 Hudson North, keep them in those beds, or you're saying we would try to, regardless of the team, pull them over to one of the units to fill first?
Yeah, whatever patients are being targeted for our 6 Hudson North or 6 Hudson South will always go to these cases, right? And so if it's better to put them on 6 Hudson North, if we have room to put them on 6 Hudson North, we'll put them on 6 Hudson North.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
you. Again, regardless of the population, if 6 Hudson North and Harkness Field still first, that we can start to decant 6 Hudson South and then show what those census numbers are, so that I can give that information and show those metrics to our senior leadership, so that we can start to have that discussion of let's close down this bed.
Okay.
So I talked about, make sure I get the point with that. Okay, so let's talk about what we're going to do for the meantime while the unit is still open, right? While the unit is still open, it is, we understand the complexity of what had occurred and the concerns about having the inconsistency of different team members, assigned to that area. So I know I have spoken to the 2 main units, 6 Hudson North and Harkness 11, about the current model that we are going to pilot and start next Tuesday. So I have spoken to some of the staff on 6 Hudson North. So for 6 Hudson North, for starting Tuesday, day shift, we're going to pre-assign and consider 6 Hudson South, quote unquote, an extension of our current unit. Essentially, we're going to we're going to pre-plan out who's being assigned to 6 Hudson South based off of
your anticoagulant classes.
So that way, we can be sure that we have someone who has charger skills. We can be sure that we have the quality of care there, because it is oncology, it's predominantly an oncology population, and we have continuity of the team. So I'm going to share my screen, because I think if I share my screen with you of how this is populated, I can help speak through it, and it'll make more sense to all of you. Hold on. I had a lot of copies. Let me make sure I get the right copy. I got it done. Okay. This really brings me, do you guys see the Word document? No, I can't see you guys, but. So this brings me back to some of my old PCD days, where I was overseeing one entire unit, one entire staff that was divided into 3 different locations. So essentially, if you look at this, and this is real time, because we picked this from the Chronos schedule. This is a manual look at how we have designated who would be assigned to 6 Hudson staff. Now, realistically, this is a great game plan, but we know as soon as we get that, that sick call or that unintended absence, the schedule will change, and we understand that. Now, what I want to be clear here is that we are not pulling the 6 Hudson North staff to populate 2 areas to leave 6 Hudson North short. It will always be backfilled by staff. And I say staff because it would either be supported by the float pool, or it would be supported by our 7 Hudson South or 6 Hudson North, and or, first of all, anybody that wants to volunteer. Okay, so we have to have some options as to where we are recruiting. I have asked the patient care directors to make sure they reach out to all per diems to see if the per diems can give shifts, so that even though it's over your targeted number that you usually staff on Cronus, we will still be able to pre-plan and make sure that our shifts are covered, right? The number here is what we're targeting for based off of the census. Now, things will get complicated, right, when we start we're only going to do this a week in advance. So every Thursday or Friday, this would be coming out for the following week. And the reason being is, with experience, I know that things shift around a lot, so we want to be going on with what's the latest data, right? Things shift, schedules change, so it will be week by week. Now, what's most important here that I want to express is that we made sure that there are charge nurses from for both sides that have the expertise. We wanted to make sure there was continuity in the amount of times that you were on that unit. So if you're 3 in a row, you're 3 in a row. And of course, you have the fact that there's that buddy system to be sure that you have that team, that team feeling, and that you're not put together with 3 different people you've never worked with. The goal will be to be, if there are 16 patients over there, that we staff that with 4 nurses. But again, every day is going to be based off of what the census is on all those 3 units. Now, with this said, we know things are going to change. We know that this is based off of just how day-to-day business goes. So we want to stress the importance that we're going to base any decisions made on staffing when there are sick calls based off of continuity of care and acuity of the patients on all the units. So as this rolls out, what we're going to do is the patient care directors, Archie, Tina, and Anthony, each morning for the day shift at 6:15, they are going to contact the nursing office and go through what the picture of the 3 units looks like. By doing so, if there are changes that need to be made, or there's staffing that needs to be pre-assigned differently, they're going to help that conversation, so it will not remain in the charge nurses. It won't be the stress of the charge nurse to figure out. Okay, it'll be the guidance of your patient care directors to drive the conversation and to be completely transparent with the conversation that they're having with each of the 3 units. So each charge nurse, by the start of their shift, should know what the nurses' assignments are, why any decisions were made, if we were going to switch nurses around from unit to unit, what the game plan is for something like outfield chemotherapy. Any discussion that we know can start a day off in the wrong foot because we've had a change in plan. Okay? The other piece of this is, as we consider the staffing for 6 Hudson North, 6 Hudson South, the nursing administrators are going to be, quote unquote, pulled out of any decision making of where staff goes, right? So for instance, if Archie calls the staffing office and they say, oh, you know what, you were down 2 nurses, we were only able to replace 1, it's going to be the responsibility of Archie, Tina, Anthony, plus, having conversation with the charge nurses to decide how things will go between the 2 units. It will not be left to the nursing administrator. I'm having a conversation with them Monday morning to deliver what we're piloting, so that way all they need to do is help help support whatever available needs you may have. So this is a very clean looking sheet and it's a clean schedule, but I kid you not, just based off of experience, I know at the end of any week, there's going to be a lot of scratch outs, there's going to be a lot of movement, and that's okay, we expect that. What that would signify to me is that there hasn't been multiple conversations to come up with an idea of where everybody should be based off of the acuity and based off of the census. The number one priority I have charged the patient care directors with is to be sure that staffing is safe based off of acuity. Now the other ask with this, so since Sick Hudson South, there is a charge nurse, but knowing that the charge nurse will have to take a lighter assignment, we have been able to secure DMT3 help. Remember, DMT3 help is the highest level of the military group. So my suggestion, and I floated this through some of you, but this is a work in progress, and you guys will have to tell me how it works out. But my suggestion is there'll be one DMT1 per day, one DMT3 for days, and 2 for nights. We wanted to support nights more because we know that the resources tend to be slimmer on the night shift, right? The charge nurses on 6 Hudson South should be the person that is coupled with at least one of the DMT3s. The DMT3s, like I've mentioned before, can do a whole lot. They can draw blood, they can give medication, they can access IV lines, they can access central lines. You know, under your direction, they can do a whole lot, and I hope some of you have had the ability to work with them. And as you see, you'll see that they're highly skilled and super adaptable to any of the needs that you may have that would help lighten your load as you do the charge nurse call. So my suggestion would be that the charge nurse on 6 Hudson South would be coupled up with the DMT3 since she has a lighter assignment, and also be able to delegate tasks to the DMT3. You are not responsible for their actions. However, you are coupled with them in a team-based staff model. Okay, I just want to make sure that's clear because I know that was something that was asked when I was huddling with staff a couple of days ago. In addition to the DMT3s, there are also DMT1s who function like nursing attendants. Christine, tell me again, we have 3, 4?
So there are 2 on days, and there will be 2 on nights.
Right, perfect. And so they're going to be of huge benefit as well. They will be predominantly assigned to 6 Hudson South. However, based off of acuity again, we have spoken to the team lead. I have spoken to the team lead of RBT, and so if 6 Hudson North needs assistance, they can then assign the DMT1 over to 6 Hudson North. Okay, so there is absolute fluidity as to how and when we are using the RBT team. With all this said, it does pull the float nurses will no longer be pre-assigned to any areas. I have asked that they be prioritized to help with the staffing on the oncology unit. And again, we closely monitor that on a daily basis. The same conversation your PCVs are going to be having every day, including weekends at 6:15 in the morning, is going to be the same conversation that they're going to have at 3 o'clock, 7 days a week. Each of the PCVs have been wonderful, and we're going to ask them to build up a rotation each weekend to make sure that they have this conversation. Because again, I want to take the load off of the charge nurses for making tough decisions that we know are hard to make when we have not enough resources. Okay, so they'll be tasked to do that for the long run. Okay. And you'll know which PCV, they'll create their schedule, so on the weekends, you'll know which PCV is covering and helping with staffing each of those weekends. Okay. And then the only other thing I wanted to update you guys on is about the outfield chemo for 6 Hudson North and 6 Hudson North and Parkland 11. With the ask that I've had for 6 Hudson North to, you know, adopt 6 Hudson South into their staffing plan, I have also asked that Ms. 11, for the most part, take accountability for the outfield chemo. Now that said, I also need this to be fluid, and I'm going to make this very clear to anybody involved with outfield chemo. There is a chemo nurse Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and the last Saturday of every month, right? We all know and love Isabel. However, I do know that there's often chemo that is not on her regular schedule. And you guys have heard me say this before, that unless it's something like ATRA, there is nothing that needs to be emergently done. Chemotherapy is usually on a day that's not a good day for us because it hasn't been planned accordingly by teams or services that don't know our process. So I will review with many of the non-oncology services like neuro-onc, odd room, any of the services that we do chemotherapy for. I will review with them that if they are planning to administer chemotherapy, that they do it on the days that we have the staff, that we have Isabel, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. If there has to be a discussion about the urgency of doing it, and it is a day that we just can't accommodate it, your patient care directors will get involved with the conversation with those teams of doctors. And if it needs to get escalated to me, I am more than happy to have that conversation as to understand what the urgency is of administering it on a day that we can't afford to do it. So I want you all to be rest assured that there is wiggle room to have the dates and times that we administer it. If there is a reason for it to be of urgency, it will have to have been escalated to me. Now, the other question that will come up will be, well, you know, there are times that the census is not in the right direction, or we are staffing to acuity that Harkness 11 would get full to some of the either 7 Hudson South or 6 Hudson North or 6 Hudson South, and they're still doing off-the-floor chemo. I again need that, and that will be one of the discussions that Archie and Tina will have each morning and each afternoon, so that way we understand where and who can have that ability to do it. Okay, again, I want to leave the burden off the charge nurses to be able to do that. Okay, I see a question here. Anu, do you want to take your stuff off, or you want me to read this?
No, you can read it.
Okay, so if I'm where nurses with float nurses, they will only be assigned solid patients and not loop. This will leave the rest of 6 Hudson South, 6 Hudson North staff with no loop patients. If not all loop patients, this will not be a balanced acuity for nurses on 6 Hudson North, especially when we have to do transfusions, cover fever, labs, chemos, and so on. Not only that, float nurses need help to change ports and to hang check chemo. Do you guys think it was a safe practice, because I don't feel comfortable with the plan of pulling floats for 6 Hudson North? And can you explain how will acuity be balanced with us, 6 Hudson North nurses, and will the floats be, and with the floats, with regards to solids and loops? Okay. So I can take a shot at this, and then I'm gonna tee up some of your patient care directors to talk about how acuity is looked at. Okay. So I understand what you're saying, Anu, and I've been there and I've seen what the quote unquote census looks like, right? But the whole idea again is to fill up both units, and so if there are a lot of malignant heme on one side of the street, we got to be sure they go predominantly to Harkness 11 first, so that way we can have an even set balance, right? We'll continue to look at the number of malignant hemes, but your staffing is to accommodate malignant hemes, right? Malignant heme patients have if you were with me 4 years ago, I was explaining how the malignant teen population is the population that drives your higher nursing care hours, not your solid tumor patients, right? And those are the patients that are particularly sicker than the others. And so we'll quickly look at how, what the population looks like. And I will work with our float pool. Christine happens to be here, and so she understands also the competency and the strength of the nurses that can be assigned over to Hudson North. Okay? And Christine, please correct me if I'm wrong here, most of the nurses that we have hired into the float pool recently have been step down, which you can scale back to medical. Is that correct, Chris?
Yes, anyone that gets newly hired is step down. We only have remaining, I think, 3 med-surg nurses total in the float pool. Everyone else is step down.
So with that understanding, Anu, I want to be sure that the nurses that are the float pool nurses are highly skilled, and that if they have to take a leukemia patient to do transfusion, fevers, labs, not chemo, but those kind of things, they should have the skill to do that. Okay, I'm not as terribly concerned that they don't have the skills to be able to take care of our sicker patients on the unit. The idea of not giving a float pool nurse the leukemia patient was essentially because our nursing care hours and you guys were the experts in managing those patients, had really formed relationships with them. It wasn't necessarily driven because the float pool nurse didn't have the competency to manage them. But again, we will pay close attention to who gets assigned to that area. Benny is asking, do you need chemo? Yes, you need to be certified to hang chemo. So the nurses on 6 Hudson North and Harkness 11 are the only nurses that can administer chemotherapy. Deanna, you had your hand raised.
Yes, hi. I just had a question about the ratios for 6 Hudson North. So I think that normally without them being an extension of 6 Hudson South, they are full at 36, correct?
Their bed capacity is 38. Their average daily census is about 32 to 33.
Okay. So with them taking on 6 Hudson South, the 6 Hudson South can go up to 16, correct?
Yeah.
So they're going to go possibly, if both units are full, they can be over, have 50 patients, over 50 patients, right?
Yeah.
So what are their ratios going to be? Are they still going to be the same with the most 1 to 4?
With the staffing, well, if we have the staffing, that's ideally what we're going to be pushing for, the 1 to 4 ratio.
Okay. And does that include the charge nurse taking 4 patients, or would that be less or no patients?
It's going to be dependent on the unit, right? So 6 Hudson North, ideally, with staffing, 6 Hudson North does not take a patient, or they may take 1 to 2 patients if needed. 6 Hudson South will take a lighter assignment, but they'll be coupled with a CSC3. The goal is to keep you at the appropriate ratios for the acuity.
Okay. Okay.
Hi, this is Lady. I wanted to say that I'm a little bit nervous in regards to the staffing because, I mean, on paper, it looked great. However, I've been there lately and it has been very understaffed. In regards to techs, in regards to nurses, the acuity of the floor is very high. We've had almost 6 step-down patients every time I'm there, 6, 7 COVID patients. There's a lot going on. We have a lot of new nurses, and these new nurses, yeah, I mean, they're great, but we also have to remember that they came in on not the best timing. They came in during COVID, so their orientation is not like, let's say mine, which was 6 years ago. It's definitely not the same. They're definitely not used to hanging chemo and chemo itself. They're still learning that coming out of orientation. As charge, sometimes I find myself having staff, but most of the staff is new. So I have to try to break myself into like 7 and try to help everyone as much as I can. and my resources are maybe 2 other senior nurses. So I find that I'm having a lot of trouble and a lot of issues with that lately. So just that alone makes me a little bit nervous in regards to like now that we're going to be sending, you know, our nurses to 6 Hudson South.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, G. And the same can go for 6 Hudson South as well, right? It's, you know, how are we populating that area? Remember when we first started this conversation, there was this feeling of the fact that we were not providing quality care and unsafe care on 6 Hudson South for the same reason. And so I understand what you're saying. I do believe that our newer nurses are fantastic, and they have really adapted to a time that is super difficult. And it will be important to keep that charge nurse out of an assignment, and we'll make sure we can do what we can do in terms of chemotherapy and supporting your nurses on that, right? We have a CNS that can help with the specialty of our unit. We have our clinical nurse manager to assist as well. So I would hope that the burden doesn't completely fall on the charge nurses, and that was one of the attempts of coming up with this model, is to try and prevent that burden from happening to you guys. Amanda has a question about the PCD check-in. 6:15 PCD check-in would lead to decisions made by 6:30 or 6:45. This plan sounds too late to make these decisions. Charge nurses will have to make multiple assignments in order to prepare for the next shift. We want smooth changes of shifts. Can the decision be made by 6 o'clock? I'm going to ask my PCDs to think about that, because again, remember, I am asking them to make sure that they accommodate these decisions in the morning. The hope is that I can train the nursing administrators to think like the patient care directors do in terms of the oncology division look like. And so I can certainly, if 15 minutes is easier, start. I know Tina's up that morning, that early. I think it's a reasonable request, but let me make sure I speak with the CCDs first, because this is what they have to do.
And Lucille, my other thought is we can also have a meeting the night before to pre-plan, to provide the nurse administrators with a tentative plan.
Yeah.
So we have an idea.
Yeah. It's a reasonable request, Amanda. We'll have to get back to you on that.
Do you have a plan for night shift? Is the same thing that happened with night shift? I know you're starting day shift is your plan for Tuesday.
The night shift conversation with the patient care directors happen every afternoon.
We have a handoff, Larry, where they give report to myself, and we figure out where everyone's going. So that's fun. That's easy.
Yeah.
Okay, but it would still be 2 6 Hudson North nurses going. Same plan.
The pre-populated plan will only be 2 6 Hudson North nurses going.
Okay.
That was the idea and rationale for that was the quality of care, the skill mix, to make sure that there was an experienced nurse over there.
I just wanted to build on kind of what G was saying before, as far as the staffing on 6 Hudson North. I think when this idea was kind of popped up to us, I think it was yesterday, I wasn't there, but I heard from some other nurses that it's just going to be 6 Hudson North that's floating over to 6 Hudson South. I know we had some big concerns, like G said, about staffing with new nurses. I, along with her, have been a charge nurse on certain days where I have probably one other senior nurse as my resource. And if we're now taking another senior nurse off of 6 Hudson North to be the charge nurse on 6 Hudson South, that's taking away a huge resource that we have as charge nurses or as senior nurses on that unit. A lot of new nurses, they've been told in the past, and it's also, we've encountered some chemotherapy issues with safety and timing as far as rituximab and other chemotherapies that should be given during the day and not started at change of shift. Just to give one example, these nurses have, put it off or haven't known like the whole process or some of the rules that have come with the chemotherapy because they did start later and they did start during COVID. And it's things like that that the senior nurses are kind of being asked to check this chemo with all the new nurses, because that's a patient safety issue. Obviously, we want them to be the most safe when it comes to chemotherapy. So it's been suggested that the new nurses check their chemotherapy with the senior nurses. Now, on any given day, we might have 1 to 2 senior nurses. I've been charge nurse where I've had 1 senior nurse with me on the floor, and every single nurse has started within the last year. I don't know exact numbers, but I think that our whole staff on 6 Hudson North, probably more than half of them, if not half of them, are new nurses starting within the last year. And then we have new people coming on as well. And it's just a very big struggle for us on 6 Hudson North and in the charge nurse role to kind of spread ourselves thin as it is just on 6 Hudson North to help out all these new nurses so that we don't have mistakes. And then we have obviously patient safety issues. We've had Karen coming around the last few days talking about clavices and cavities and falls, and it's just kind of seems like it's too much to cover. Like, a lot of the new nurses need to have like better practices with central lines and Foleys and why they put the Foleys in. And like I said, they all got orientation during COVID. So these were not like something that we addressed every day. We didn't have Karen coming around and like teaching us best practices. So I think it falls along that line is all these things need to be fixed. We need to put more resources into building up the skill set of these new nurses. And by taking more senior nurses and now spreading us across the board, you're taking a senior nurse on 6 Hudson South, we are losing even more of our resources that are able to teach best practices and safety measures.
I can tell you, as we're looking at the schedule, Jessica, there, on 6 North, if you have 10 nurses, right? I'm looking at Tuesday right now. You have 10 nurses on there, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are more than over 2 years of experience. So it's really going to be based off of how we schedule. So if we want to make sure that there's an even skill mix to support the newer nurses, as we do the schedule and as we look at Kronos, as we plot out your schedule, we're going to have to evenly make sure that there is X number of skilled nurses and X number of newer nurses.
Right.
When we do the weekly assignment, and we'd be able to see, if we're pulling a senior nurse to be in charge on 6 Hudson North, on 6 Hudson South, then that there's enough nurses on 6 Hudson North that have that clinical experience to help foster the new nurses. A lot of the scheduling and coordination is going to be driven by the actual schedule itself. So we're going to need to go back and look at the schedule.
Yeah, because March is already made. So that schedule that is made for like maybe the next 5 days that you've already made has a fair share of like senior nurses on. And there's also days that are going to have vacations coming up, and this schedule is already made. So that's fine moving forward. But for the month of March, we're as it is right now. So it might not be that way every day. And multiple charge nurses are on here right now saying that they've experienced that already on months worth of shifts that we've had like no support. A part of that also comes from no ancillary support, where I feel like we're looking out really to staff 6 Hudson South with all of these resources. There have been days where we've had 1 tech on the floor on 6 Hudson North, and then 6 Hudson South has had a tech, a UA, accurate nursing staff, and then they've also had the Army people to help them. We started one morning with 3 Army people on our side, and we were like, great, this is so helpful. 10 minutes later, someone came over from the other side and said, we're taking them all away. We went back to 0 techs on the floor, and it's kind of been like that on every shift. I don't think we've had one day in the past few months where we've had solid ancillary staff on our unit, built with call outs and everything too. That is a factor. But I think that's an overall thing that's
I think
right. And I was actually there that day, and we were so happy to have them with us. And it was such a change, I remember, because again, we were used to 0 and 1. And to see them there, so helpful. They are super helpful. it was great. And then when they came and took them away, we were just asking like, okay, but like, you know, what's the ratio? Like, let's figure this out. Maybe we can try to keep at least one. Like, we're just doing everything to try to help us out pretty much, because we were going absolutely crazy that morning.
So let's go back to what a couple of things I started with, right? I'm happy to hear that Six Hudson South had the resources that they needed, and then now we felt like Six Hudson North is short. So remember, there are 4 DMP1s that are coming to also help. They could be used across the 2 units. These concerns or questions that Jessica and G have raised, again, are conversations that your patient care directors are going to be more heavily involved in to make some of the decisions or help explain why some decisions were made across the board between the divisions. Okay, there are a bunch of hands raised, and for the sake of time, I want to be sure we get to all of them. I think, who is the first one? I think, Deanna, I saw yours first. I'll just go in order of how I see it in my chat room.
Okay, I just have a question about what's been happening on BMT lately. So what's been happening with us is that they've been pulling our nurses to float them to 6 Hudson South, and then they're sending us float nurses, which leaves our patient population is very difficult at times, and we can't have fresh transplants with float nurses, so that leaves us struggling. Is that going to continue to happen?
Pina, I'm gonna ask you to speak to that. I don't know of what occurred where you had a float nurse come to you and then you have to staff Six Hudson South. I don't know why that would have happened.
So I think this was an incident once or twice that occurred because with the palliative beds, we wanted to ensure that we had an oncology nurse present on the unit, and we were the only unit that could supply that because of staffing. So that would be why. Now, in regards to covering oncology, that won't be the case because you'll have 6 Hudson North, but it is still a possibility that BMT will have to float when needed.
Briella, I'm going to go to you. You want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. My question mainly was just the fact that if we have these 16 beds available and the teams see that they're available, isn't there kind of like no end in sight, because you know they're admitting patients that have beds, so maybe they would have gone to another medicine unit, or maybe they wouldn't have been admitted at all. I'm just curious what the end in sight is here, because it seems like we're just going to keep taxing 6 Hudson North and nothing really is going to come from it. We're just going to keep adding more beds and not adding more staff.
We're not adding more beds, and what you're basically asking is if we can't 6 Hudson South and put all the patients on 6 Hudson North, they're going to still fill up 6 Hudson South. Is that what the question is about?
Right. I mean, the fact that if there's a bed available and a patient needs to be admitted for chemo, I mean, they're going to use the space.
Yeah. No, and that's where we sort of first drove on talking about the capacity, right? Because the question was asked, and I have asked it, when would we scale back and shut down 6 Hudson South? So the prioritization that we have on how we admit to oncology is the same prioritization medicine will have. The 7 Garden North, 6 Garden North, 6 Garden South, all of those beds have to be filled first with medicine or hospital patients. Those teams have to get their patients first, and then it will trickle down to us if there is no more capacity. And so as they fill up their beds, like as of today, and Kate Blair, you can chime in if you have more information, but the last check, we had 0 oncology patients to admit thus far. I think there's a palliative care patient that's coming over, and there is currently no one in medicine that's slotted to come because they have appropriate teams in medicine on the medicine unit. So there is a bigger bird's eye view of what's happening with capacity, and so we're not going to be admitting the patients just because we have the bed. Everybody else has to go first. Okay, so. Kate, is there any current update to give an example of what's happening with the mask?
So every day the MAC reaches out. Sometimes it's one of our oncology PAs. Sometimes it's Marianne. Today, they kind of look at bed boards all across the units, like not just obviously oncology, but through the entire hospital. So right now, fortunately, it's a kind of a lull of a day where there's not that many admissions, and there are other teams and units that can take patients other than oncology. The medicine patients are only coming when there are other medicine teams, like cardiology also, don't have any capacity, and they spill over onto oncology, and there are open beds here that the patients can come to. But fortunately today, each oncology unit is essentially full, so there's no capacity there because it's mainly all oncology patients here.
So what I was really kind of meaning was, so on a normal day without COVID, they have a limited number of space. So now with these extra beds, they're able to accept more patients, correct? That maybe wouldn't have had space in the emergency room. So, I mean, we're still adding more beds. We're giving them the ability to take the oncology patients and bring them onto our service when we don't have the oncology staffing to staff those extra beds. So we're still taking our oncology patients and having 54 beds without any more staff.
But right now, I was going to say right now, the only way that medicine patients would come here is if there's room on the oncology services. So since there's oncology patients, like leukemics, the solids and whatnot, there is no room for medicine patients to come here because the teams are capped.
Right.
So
not
it's only, no. So that's what I'm just saying, like the only way that other medicine patients can come here is if there's room for the teams. It's not just that they see an open bed and they're like, oh, just throw them up here, because the oncology teams have to cover them here.
Right. So I'm not referring to the medicine patients. I'm talking about our extra oncology patients now, since we have these extra onc beds.
Yeah, so your extra oncology patients would go back to medicine once medicine began.
So that we would send oncology patients to a medicine floor?
Yeah, that's what we used to do pre-COVID, right? We are only open because of the surge. Once we can see the numbers from the surge decrease, and that's the number I don't have to give to you guys, but once you start to decant and there are medicine beds available, you shut down the oncology overflow, but continue to go back to the system prior to how it used to be. We are not setting up a new unit for oncology.
If we have open beds, like the last few shifts we've worked in, we've had like 33, 32 patients, and there have been, 12 patients on 6 Hudson South. Would we move them over to 6 Hudson North? Like, that's what
I wouldn't at this point. If unless we have a date of when we're shutting the unit down, I wouldn't go through transferring patients over at this point.
Right, but that's.
Vanessa, you had a question? You want to unmute yourself, Vanessa?
Hi, sorry. I just wanted to go back to the whole support staff thing. You had mentioned that management would help, but management's there all day and then only until 11 p.m. So on night shift, sometimes, most of the time, we have 0 techs. And if we have one, it's basically like we have 0. Because I don't know if it's in the contract or anything, but when we have 1 tech, they only take 1 patient from us, and they only do 1 a.m. vitals. They don't do 5 a.m. They do finger sticks and a bath for one of your patients. So I was just wondering, because when I was on 6 Hudson South, they had 1 nursing student who did every single person's vital signs, 16 patients, every single person's finger stick, and she was helping with everyone do their morning baths. So I just don't understand why on our unit, 1 tech gets to only do 8 vital signs, if there's 8 nurses, 9, but isn't held accountable for anything more. If we have to stretch thin, I feel like our support staff has to stretch thin with us.
I understand what you're asking, Vanessa, and that might not be a discussion that we can have and resolve in the next 3 minutes. And it's a bigger and more historical issue regarding the productivity of the ancillary support. Vanessa, what unit are you from?
What unit what? Sorry.
What unit are you from?
6 Hudson North.
Okay. So I'm not unfamiliar with this kind of situation. Again, we're talking about the productivity of 1199 or ancillary support and what they can do or will do or what's been based off of the guidelines. That's going to be a unit specific, a unit conversation. And so that would be something we have to take offline and address. Okay. Anne? Oh, Karina's, I'm sorry. Karina's was next. Karina's Anne, and then we have another question from Deanna.
Yeah, I just have a question. So where does this like direct admit research patients come into our staffing? Because there are some times when I was in charge at night and we see all these direct admit research patients that is supposed to be a 2-to-1 ratio, and then you end up having to squeeze in some patients to the nurses that will be receiving the patient that will be receiving research, like direct admits the next day. So I find myself, like, I have no one to really reach out to, no management presence overnight. So in this case, do we just have to wait it out till 6:15? Is this something that the management will put into their consideration with staffing?
Yeah, absolutely. If research has only been allowed to admit one a day, and even if that, I've turned away a lot of asks in regards to direct admissions because of capacity. But if we know that there's a research patient that's going to be falling onto the night shift, that certainly would be a conversation in regards to staffing, as well as some of the research has to be, it's usually done at a certain time of day, and so if it makes no sense for the patient to be admitted, that they could be they may not even be treated that night. It's another discussion that we're going to have to address, right? And so I need you guys to be able to, and I have said this repeatedly to the patient care directors over and over again, that they need to make themselves available and present to be able to answer some of these scenarios that come up that we need to brainstorm on how we're going to support. Okay, so you have to mention it to them so that they can work through what the best plan would be and whether that plan B we postpone the next admission. Anne, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did.
So I think we'll have 2 more questions and then we're going to have to come to a close.
Okay. So I just wanted to ask, so we're talking about ideal conditions where there's no call-outs, but what happens if there's more than 2 call-outs? We're still staffing 6 Hudson South. Can we expect management to then come on the floor and help us? Because you guys have chemo certification, you guys, things that floats or sometimes DM3, the military staff can't do. So can we expect management then to step in and help us on the floor? Because I think that would be really helpful, especially, on nights we don't have a lot of management working overnight, so we have to kind of depend on each other. And it's right now with the high acuity and the short staffing, it's really hard. And I know that sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Anne, finish your thought.
So yeah, I was just saying, so I know that some hospitals, in some hospitals, like the management comes to the floor and helps the nurses with their fingertips or whatever needs to be done. So, but I don't think I've really seen that on our floor.
Okay, and we will always help backfill support, right? And so I can tell you that if the managers need to come onto the floor, the clinical managers and CPEs, we can certainly do so. I still have my chemotherapy certification and can manage that, and more than happy to. So we can certainly support you if it's you guys wanting me to come and help you turn a patient, give them meds. I can do that at some time, right? I think the conversation here is that what I want to impress on you is that our intentions are not to make you feel like you have no support. Okay, and so we will do what we can to help support you. I want to get Deanna's question in, and I do think I see, Amelia, you're having a debrief with the team after, right?
Yeah.
So, you get the last question.
Okay, so my question is, Is there any way we could hire another chemo nurse just so that chemo off the floor would not be an issue? Because hanging chemo off the floor is always a complete disaster, and it might look like there's only one chemo to hang off the floor, but that itself can take hours. Just trying to find the nurse, trying to get the nurse to give the pre-meds, trying to get the nurse to get labs done. It's always a complete disaster.
I could probably say right off the bat that the answer is no, because if I get an additional FTE for nursing, it would be put to one of these. It would be put to floor nursing. And merely because the volume of chemotherapy off the floor is not there, right? And so it would not support a financial plan for us to use resources for specifically an outfield chemo nurse. I would much rather put it into staffing. Okay. So I am glad that you guys have had a great discussion with me. I'd like to reemphasize that I am available. I will walk around. I have had my own divisional. I'm happy to see that there's lots of presence here, but I am happy to make sure we continue these discussions at some of my bi-monthly divisional meetings that I have. And so I would love to see your presence there so we can continue to talk about some of these concerns. I know this is going to be, split pretty clunky as we continue to staff Six Hudson South. And again, I have asked your leadership team, I cannot emphasize this enough, to be available, to be present, and to work out some of the questions that often burden the staff, particularly the charge nurses. The goal here was to make sure that we staff to acuity, that we staff safely, and that we are staffing where we understand what the clinical skill mix is needed on all of the units. Okay, I thank you guys, and I look forward to hearing from you all again.
Yep. For everybody, the link is in the chat for the debrief, so I'll see you all there.
I'll keep it up just for a second so that way people can link.